To instantiate or to use the instantiate function, we're gonna have to make a reference or a game object that we will be spawning. Say for example, we want to spawn this bad boy, this game object at a particular position. So we're gonna have to reference a game object, and we're gonna have to reference its transform component. So in our variable or in our script, we need to declare a transform data type and a game object. So let's head to our IDE, Visual Studio. So instantiate function is useful in different scenarios in your game. So as I've said earlier, it can be used in shooting bullets or in any part of your game that you're going to spawn a game object. So let's declare first the reference point or the object where the object will instantiate or spawn. So let's have public transform. So if you can still remember, variables is not limited only to the data type int, float, string, character, bool, and so on. It can also be it can also use properties in the game engine. So public transform, let's say circle spawner. So in this transform variable, we will have the circle spawner wherein the circle or the object will spawn. Then we're gonna have to declare the public, or let's declare it public so that we can include its value in the inspector easily. So public game object, let's say circle, let's just circle. So circle. So the game object that we will be spawning is a circle, or depending, let's say for example, we want to spawn bullets, we want to spawn zombies, or it depends on you. But for this example, we're going to use circle, and the transform component is the circle spawner, which we will set up in the game. So we have public circle transform circle spawner and public game object circle. And here let's make a function. Let's delete this one, and let's delete this one. So let's say void object spawn. Okay, we have already the curly braces, and here we are now going to use the instantiate function. So the syntax of that is instantiate open and close parentheses. First we will have the object original, or the object that we will be spawning. So we'll be spawning here the public circle, or the game object circle, comma, then next the transform parent, or I call it as the area or the point, the reference point where the circle will be spawned. So the transform parent meaning the transform component of that game object. So we're gonna store it here in the transform component, the transform variable circle spawner. So comma circle spawner dot, since we're gonna have to use or its transform component, that transform that position whenever or wherever that object is positioned, comma, and the rotation, or bool instantiate world space. But since we're not gonna make any rotation, we're just gonna have to write quaternion dot identity close parenthesis and this semicolon. So expectedly we will be instantiating the circle at the position of this circle spawner depending on the where we set this up in the game, and the rotation value which will not be doing or implementing, so we're just gonna make it null or simply type quaternion dot identity. And we're gonna call this bad boy function it at the start function. So object spawn, let's hit Ctrl S, head back to the Unity. Okay. So the script one is attached to the circle. Let's disable this one since the circle is the game object that we will be spawning. Remove component. Let's use the square. Let's remove this one. We don't need this capsule. So here and at the position of the square, we should be spawning the circle. So let's have this one square, the position here, the transform. So we're just gonna have to drag the square since that is the position where the circle will spawn. Drag it in the circle spawner. And the circle, we're not gonna drag this bad boy instantly to this variable circle. First, we need this circle to become a prefab. So let's make this circle as a prefab. And let's disable this game object here. So sir, how are you going to instantiate an object that is disabled in the hierarchy or in the games here? So that is the use of the prefab. We're gonna use the game object, so we need to make it prefab, and on the square where the script one is attached, the game object that we will be spawning will be dragged in the circle variable. So expectedly, this game object will spawn in this position. Let's enlarge this square so that we can see that the circle will spawn. So let's hit Ctrl S. Let's see, Ctrl S. And there we have it. The circle spawns at the position of this square. So that is the instantiate function. Let's add a rigid body component in our circle so that whenever the circle spawns here in the position of the square, it will fall. Let's add rigid body. So there are two components in rigid body. This rigid body is good for the 3D game or 3D game, but since we're making a 2D game, we're gonna include rigid body 2D. So as you can see here, rigid body is a part of physics component in any game object in Unity game engine. And we have here the body type, material. We're not gonna do anything with that. Mass, and the mass scale is 1, gravity scale is 1. So whenever this is active or the simulated is active, physics component will be active also in this game object. So since we have a gravity scale of 1, so expectedly this will fall. Just like when you jump and Earth has a gravity, we will go back to the ground. So let's have here, we have a rigid body 2D component. Okay, there you have it. So expectedly, the circle will fall. Now where is the circle? I can't see the circle. It's too small. It's color bound. Anyway, so let's do that again. Okay, let's spawn again the circle, and expectedly it will fall. So the circle fall, and it's too fast. Gravity scale is too strong, and it keeps on falling, and falling to the ground, to the sky, and so that is the instantiate function. Next, let's include the on trigger and on collision function in your game object. So That is also useful. Everything in the function or every function in the unit is useful depending upon the preferences of your game or the setup of your game, whatever. You get the point. Anyway, let's have the on collision and on trigger. So collision, by definition, whenever we interact with any game object or some, let's say we clap our hands, our right hand and left hand collide and it makes a sound. But we're not gonna make any sound here. We're just gonna make the game object collide with each other. So for example, let us have here a game object, this square, and let's add also, let's disable this first. We're not gonna use the script one. Let's add the rigid body 2D so that we can add physics to it, and the gravity scale, let's say 0.3. Let's lower the gravity scale, and a collision or a collider component. So it depends on your preference, but most commonly, whatever the shape or of the game object, the collider should be correspond or should correspond to it. So this is a square. Let's have a collider. Collider. Let's have box collider. Can add box collider because it conflicts with the rigid body derived component. And why is that? Oh no, I'm sorry. It should not be box collider. It should be so. Remember, Techians, that whenever you see a 2D name in every component in the Unity or in any game object that you will be adding a component, that is built for 2D games. So we have here box collider that is for 3D games. So since we are making a 2D game, or we are in a 2D game platform, we're gonna use box collider 2. So there we have it. So you can make a collider bigger than the shape. Just hit this button here. You can edit it. Okay, let's just make it as is. Control Z, Control Z. Okay, so we're gonna make this object fall. Let's duplicate this one. Duplicate. And let's move this bad boy here. Let's change the color to green. Why it didn't change the color? Okay, let's change it to. But since we duplicated it and it has a function, a rigid body component, expectedly when we hit the play button, both of these objects will fall. So in this green object, let's remove the rigid body component so that it will stay as is in its position. And we will have the box collider. So whenever a game object has a box collider and it interacts with another game object that also has a collider component, it will eventually, or it will collide with each other. So this one bad boy here, we have a rigid body component and it will fall with a gravity scale of 3 and a mass of 1, and it will collide here in the green square. Is that a square? That's a rectangle already. Anyway, okay, let's see. It will fall, boom, and it collides. So since the mass are just the same, so they will not fall, or this object here will not be pushed. But since this has a collider, expectedly this will collide and it would, and the object was put into it. Let's increase the mass of this white square or rectangle, this white game object. Let's say 2.3. Let's add more mass to it. So I guess if you're good in physics, when this game object falls, this will push this green game object. So let's see. Okay, still okay. We have that. Anyway, that is a collider or collision component. So what is, as I'm saying, we are going to tackle on collision. So what is that? So on collision, is a function in a Unity game engine wherein it is a bool function, a bool type of function. Whenever a game object collides with another game object, it will perform a certain action. So we can do that in our code. So let's say the script one, since we deactivated the script one. Box collider. Okay, let's enable the script one here in the white. So let's have here. So let's disable first this instantiate function. We're not gonna use this one. Oh, it's not that one. Let's make it a comment. Then comment this. Okay. So let's comment this out also. I want this to be commented out. Okay. So let's have the on collision function. So on collision function has two components. The on collision enter, so that means the object when the object collides, and the on collision exit when the game object uncollides. Am I right? Or if the game object after the collision, a certain action will happen. Let's say let's use the on collision. So void, we're not gonna return anything. On collision, and there you have it. There are functions that has a 2D in it. So if you're using, or if you're gonna make a 2D project, you're gonna have to use function that has a 2D name in it. So we're gonna use on collision enter. On collision enter 2D. Okay, so automatically it will appear as like that. Let's make this, okay, let's say make it as is private. So we have here private void on collision enter 2D, and here we have collision 2D and the reference of our game object. Let's say we just want to make this call. You can modify this one, you can customize this one, but mostly we use call. And here we're gonna use the if else statement. So if call that game object, okay, call if this game object collides with, if call that game object that tag is equal to, let's say, square or green square. So if we're going to read this code, if call that game object, if this object where this script is attached to collides with the game object that has a tag of green square, it will perform a certain action. So let's have here print only. Print collision happens, or collision is present, and semicolon here. But what about this one? Maybe you're wondering now, what is this tag function here, or tag name? Green square. Okay, so in your game object, in order for it to be considered as a green square or tag, here we have the tag green square. We're gonna add, or here modify its tag into green square. So I have already here added the green square, but as you select this drop down button here, you won't be able to see the green square, so you need to write or select add tag. So you're just gonna click add tag and hit the plus button and type the green square, or what name of the tag that you prefer. So since we have added green square, so I've just selected there the plus sign and type green square. It should be the same on the code, so because if it's not, it will not work. So let's see. So expectedly, we have written here in the code, if call that game object, if this call game object wherein this script is attached to collides with a game object with a tag green square, it should print collision is present. So let's hit the play button. Okay, it should fall, and there we have it. Collision is present was printed in the console. Okay, let's use our previous function, the instantiate. Instead of calling it in the start function, let's call it here in the onCollision enter. So let's remove this comment sign. Okay, let's uncomment this variables, and let's paste this here instead of printing onCollision enter. So expectedly, if that collision happens, it will call this function object spawn, and inside this function we have the instantiate method, or inside this method we have the instantiate function. So let's hit Ctrl S since we have made a change, and let's head back to our project. Okay, so when this object collides, the circle will be instantiated. Okay, square. Where is the square here? We just remove the square to transform square. And yep, let's transform since we deactivated this a while ago. And the prefab circle. Okay, let's see. So this should instantiate the circle, and that circle has a rigid body. Okay, let's see. Boom! And there we have it. How cool is that? The object collides and the circle was instantiated as written here in our code. So next, let's have the on trigger enter. So what is the difference with on collision and on trigger enter? So collision, there is a solid interaction between the game object, but in a trigger function, as you can see here in the collider function, we have the is trigger, and since it is disabled or false, the object collides in a solid manner. But what if we can make it collide just like Flash? What does he call that when he is moving too fast and he can pass through? I don't know. I forgot the term. Anyway, it can pass through to the game object, but still a collision will be read by the code, or will happen. The only difference is the object will pass through in it. So let's hit this is trigger to check, and we're gonna use here not the on collision enter. Instead, we're gonna use let's just make another function of collision function, void on, not on collision, on trigger enter 2D. We also have the on trigger exit, so whenever it exits the game object, another action will be implemented. So on trigger enter 2D, since we're making a 2D we're making a project in a 2D platform. So okay, on trigger enter 2D, and we also have collision, and I want to change this call. Okay, let's have again the if else statement, or if function. If call this parameter call that game object that tag, and let's have the tag again. If this game object collides with a game object with a tag called green square, let's just have first a print function, print object pass. Okay, object is method. Square. Okay, I know the error. We should, yeah, the quotations. Object pass through. So let's have here a semicolon. Let's comment this out. We're not gonna use this one. When you hit the isTrigger function as true. Okay, wait, it's compiling. It's still compiling. When you hit the isTrigger true in any collider function, collision will be deactivated. Instead, the pass-through action or the isTrigger will be activated. Okay, I want to comment this out. Boom. Okay. On trigger enter if call.game object that tag to green square will object pass through. Okay, so expectedly we will be seeing here a print object pass through, and this object will only pass. Okay, there will be an error. I forgot to set the green square. Okay, it's still passed. Okay, the game object white pass through in the green square, but I should also set the box collider of the green square to trigger. So let's see. Okay, it should pass through, and there we have it. So it passed through. Let's say let's use the destroy function. So if this game object collides with a game object that has a tag green square, destroy game object. Okay, game object. So meaning the game object where the script is attached to will be destroyed when this collision or is on trigger enter happens. Let's see, Control S. Okay, let's see here. Boom, there you have it. As the collision happens, the game object where the script is attached to was destroyed. But what if you want to destroy this green square instead of the white square? So we can do that. We're just gonna make small modifications in our code. So destroy call that game object. So meaning we're going to destroy the game object that this game object collides to. So let's hit the Control S, and expectedly we're gonna destroy this excuse me, this green square. So in our letter catch game, we're gonna use this isTrigger or onTrigger enter function. Whenever the letter collides with the catcher, it will be destroyed. Whether right or wrong letter, it will be destroyed. Boom! Green square was destroyed. So you can play along with this onTrigger or onCollisionEnter function, depending upon your preference, as I always said. So that's it for the scripting basics. So you can just rewatch this video from the scripting basics 1 and the 2 and 3. This one, scripting basics in Unity C# script.